things that no one needs. Little things to joke about.
FM 89 WONC, Naperville, Chicago. You're tuned into the Yardbird Suite. Modern jazz from Bird to the Beyond every Sunday afternoon, 3 to 6. Today I'm joined in the studio with Chicago area vocalist, bassist, and educator, Katie Ernst.
Hello.
Hi, how you doing?
Super good. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Now, first off, vocalist, bassist, educator, these are three pretty big hats you wear throughout your life as a gigging musician. You kind of straddle all the lines of the
spectrum.
Yes, of the spectrum.
Yes.
So which hat would you say you wear the most?
Oh, wow. Well, let's see. When I was in college, I would say that I was a bass player that sang. And then in my time moving to Chicago, I was more of a singing bass player. And now I'm a singing bass player educator because I've been doing a lot more teaching as well. So I've kind of morphed all three hats into one epic hat.
So then, what's your musical background, and how did you get started as a vocalist and a bassist?
Sure. I grew up in Naperville, Illinois, so it's good to be home. I was a product of the Naperville Public School music programs, and I started playing the double bass when I was 9. And I always sang in school choir, and I just kind of developed my musical leanings in a very slow way. I was in no way a super musical prodigy where they were like, this girl will be great. But as I did more music in high school and I went to some music camps and things like that, I started to learn more about jazz and really started to fall in love with what that stood for. And then I went to the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York for college for jazz double bass. And kind of also got my singing chops together there because there was no vocal program for jazz musicians. Mm-hmm. And then I moved to Chicago, and I've been playing and teaching and working ever since. So that's my short form bio.
And what did you grow up listening to in that time? I guess you did grow up listening to jazz then?
Yes, but only I actually don't know why exactly. My parents were not jazz fans. One of the cute stories of my youth is that when I told my parents I wanted a jazz CD for Christmas, right? I hadn't gotten to the specifics of what that was. They got me a CD called Jazz for When You're Alone. And it was a compilation of very like dozy ballads because they figured that if I was going to be listening to jazz, it was going to be on my own because they weren't interested in that. But I went to the library and picked up any jazz CD. I remember going to Disc Replay. I don't know if that's still in Naperville.
Yes,
but,
I think it's still on.
Yeah, it's somewhere.
It's on Butterfield Road,
yeah.
I think.
And I would just go through and I would look at their jazz CDs. And some of them that I picked out would be classic gems, and some of them would be really bizarre CDs that no one should have bought in the first place, let alone resold. But I was kind of just consuming all this kinds of music without much of a a strict genre policy either.
You just kind of ease yourself into it then.
Yeah. And I played in a rock band in high school too, called the Cosmonauts. And
Shout out to the Cosmonauts.
Shout out to the Cosmonauts. We were kind of an indie rock folky thing. I played upright bass.
Yeah. Back when indie rock folky thing really meant something.
Yeah, when that was a real scene. And no, that was the first time I played in like an odd time signature where we started to dabble in some things and
like prog rock or something.
Yeah, just kind of like trying out new stuff. Yeah. So I was kind of very open to lots of different kinds of music, and then went off to school for jazz specifically after that. There you go.
And what artists did you naturally gravitate towards as you started getting more into the jazz idiom?
Yeah, let's see. I was really moved by the version of Solitude that Billie Holiday sings. Oh, yes. There's something about that kind of bittersweet. You could feel the complexity of that song. It wasn't just about being sad or just about being in love. There was that kind of mixed emotion that I think gets reflected in some of my current projects now.
Right.
I really like Charles Mingus and the energy and the I didn't really know what was going on, but it seemed like there was more to his music than just the actual song, and that indeed is the case. But so I also liked Ella Fitzgerald, and Chet Baker was another big person for me. Kind of those like slightly tragic music figures were right up my alley. Yeah.
And are there any more current influences that you're looking at now, or?
Oh man, well, being in Chicago, I didn't expect or necessarily know I was going to be a strong, staunch Chicago musician, because I was like, well, people are in New York, there's some people in LA, Chicago's kind of like home. But this particular music community and what's happening right now is very exciting. There's this good energy and lots of bands that are doing things that are... there's a strong like community emphasis. There's that element of like freedom and AACM influence that gets into some things. There's a creative improvised music scene. There's a super swinging, more traditional scene. And all these really cool bands are out there right now.
There you go. It's not just my bias anymore. It's our bias.
No, and there's actually just there was a New York Times article very recently that was talking about kind of all of these Chicago bands and how there's this kind of interesting energy and like identity that's being formed in Chicago. And to have the New York Times,
there you go.
Like say, ooh, what's going on over there is interesting, is kind of a testament to what's going on in this like under 40 age group of musicians. So, jazz fans in Naperville, don't sleep on your Chicago music scene, because there's a lot of cool stuff happening. Yeah.
Well, generally I do think we need more jazz clubs out here in the western suburbs.
It's tricky.
Yeah.
It's funny. I play in a band called Twin Talk, and we usually play shows in Chicago for younger audiences. And I was asked by a great artist in Wheaton named Lou Achenbach, who live paints jazz, to do a concert in Wheaton. And we played at this tea place. And it was an all ages show. It was kind of early, and it brought out like this suburban audience of people that were like, we can never go to Chicago to see a show that late. Or, I brought my kids to come see some jazz and they were into it. But it's funny how you forget that there's all these people that are hungry for art and music that are not so far away. So we need to do a good exchange, I think. A little bit of both coming to each location.
Well, I think so too. And, I usually ask the artist, how's the scene going? But I guess you kind of answered it right there.
Oh, yeah.
No, yeah, that's great. So in terms of the new music scene, I know I haven't been exposed to it all too well, since I'm usually centered around classic, jazz of the 1940s to the 60s. But for new music, I know one venue for it is the Constellation. And I know that's a good hub of new music.
Constellation is a venue in Chicago, and they've been doing a great job of bringing in kind of the current artistic jazz in both in Chicago and beyond.
That's where you had your release party?
Yes. I've had release shows for Twin Talk and also for my Dorothy Parker Little Words project too. So that is kind of a really great venue for lots of music. But their roster is a pretty good representation of what's going on in Chicago. There's a lot of... Twin Talk is releasing our record on Ears and Eyes, which is a record label that has a really big group of Chicago young musicians that kind of would give you a short list of people to check out. And they're actually based in Argentina, which is funny. But it was a Chicago transplant who now lives in Argentina with his daughter and his wife.
Cool.
But bands like Sunspeak or Dave Miller, who's a guitar player. Old Door Phantoms is a new album that's out. Living Bridge. There's just so many things that are happening right now, which is really exciting. John Deidemeyer, who's a drummer in Chicago, just had a project out. Ears and Eyes Records will give you a good list of current Chicago jazz that's really fresh.
Nice, I'll have to reach out to them.
So silent I, when love was by, that he yawned and turned away. Now sorrow clings to my apron strings. I have so much to say.
Now, you mentioned your new album, so let's get to that. 2 albums I want to get to here today, both out now. First off, your personal project entitled Little Words.
Yeah.
And if I'm correct here, it's an album of original music composed by you, but based around the poetry, now lyrics, of Dorothy Parker.
Yes. So I took Dorothy Parker's short poetry and I set that to original music. And instead of it being spoken word over music, it's sung. So they just become the lyrics to the songs. And that project, it started when I wrote a song in college, but took the next 3 or 4 years to develop this book. And then I realized that I had enough music to actually make an album out of it. And it's a quartet project, and I got to premiere the project at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., which was kind of goofy and amazing.
Wow.
And it's funny because with a project versus a band, you can only do the same project so many times in Chicago or in one place before it's just like, you've played that set of music before, move on. So I feel like I don't want to let that project die, but I think it's going to have to be kind of moved over to just being like an annual concert around Dorothy Parker's birthday or in Poetry Awareness Month or something like that.
This is your debut album, is it?
It's the first album I have under my name.
Okay. That's actually, I've been noticing that trend of debut albums for this newer generation of jazz musicians. The trend used to be, right up until, I guess, the mid-2000s even, it was presenting artists, and then they do half standards, half their own music, maybe. Now it's like, I know Xavier Breaker had his Dreamology, and that was like centered around dreamscapes. Living Bridge, I listened to that album with Artie Black and all that stuff. So I think the creativity of this new generation of Chicago jazz musicians in particular, I think it's really blossoming. Yeah,
and it's a good observation to say that, usually you had to prove your worth by showing that you could play over some jazz standards.
And I think that was also tethered to the labels as well.
Sure, yeah, because it's easier to just have that familiarity, and there's some, I'm sure, money involved too. But yeah, it seems like now there seems to be a move towards more original compositions, or having more intention in the whole of the project. Like mine is based around one poet's particular work, or Xavier being based around dreamscapes, or Living Bridge is based around like that band's communication with each other. And so it's like, unless a standard song fits into that vision, it's like you don't want to kind of just stick something in there for the sake of proving that you can play over a tune, and I in no way mean to bash the jazz standards, because I have a huge love for them, and I sing and play jazz standards every week on Sunday nights. But it's just like, if I was going to do that project, it would be, this is my jazz standards project, and I'm going to do something meaningful with it. So Absolutely. It's kind of, like being more intentional, or wanting to present something that has a kind of a thread or a vision or something like that, a theme.
Something original, something you can uniquely provide.
Right.
Yeah. So just going back to the Little Words project, what was the approach to the composition? Because surely it had to have been different, because you had to work around the text of the poems.
Yeah, and there's a lot of information built into a poem. The poem gives you a certain rhythmic meter in how, when you read the words, it works. Some of Dorothy Parker's poems rhyme, so that rhyme scheme gives a sense of phrasing, or how long each melody should be. And I tried to be very aware of not sticking words on a melody that didn't make sense to how you would say it. In like normal English.
Just for any songwriters in general, that's usually a problem. They'll try to really force a lyric.
Right, yeah, and it kind of becomes distracting when the melody and the words don't fit in a way that feels natural. And so a lot of my compositional process would be, I'd have my book of poetry open, and I'd have my bass, and I would read the words out loud. I would sing them in a way that felt like the way that it felt when I spoke the words, and then I would accompany that with a bass line until I found something that seemed to match up or resonate, or that fit the emotional content. So it was a lot of kind of trying to find the organic melody within that, and also not feeling restrained to having you sing the melody, and then you have solos, and then you have the same melody again. But this project uses form in a maybe a more kind of like developmental way where I might sing I won't sing the words more than once, or I'll sing a piece of the poem more than once, but you don't get the whole thing twice. So using the meaning of the words and the sounds of the words being spoken as helping to inform the structure of the song.
The sun's gone dim and the moon's turned black, for I loved him and he didn't love back.
So what wound up being your favorite end result from the album? Because for me it was I keep saying two-story volume, two-volume
novel.
That
Yeah.
one, I just like the shortness of the text, and it's just sassy and playful in the way you interpreted the music.
Yeah, it's funny because that one is definitely the one of the more like strong, sassy poems that it's still heartbreaky, right? You know, it's the poem is called Two-Volume Novel, and it's the sun's gone dim and the moon's turned black, for I loved him and he didn't love back. So right to the heart. You know, it didn't work out. But the poem is presented in a way, and Dorothy Parker writes this poem in a way that just feels like, oh, well, you know, like tra-la-la, that happened, and this was my 2-volume novel of 4 lines of poetry. And so there's kind of this strength in just being like, yes, well, that happened. My heart was broken, and I'm moving on. And so that song is probably one of the more groovy, kind of funky ones, because I wanted to have a sense of like, you know, like there's strength to these words, even though if you get a little bit closer, it's you've lost and are sad.
And I think even though you were the one that came up with the music, I feel like I got to know Dorothy Parker a lot more, just in terms of the way the music interplayed with the text. If you could tell us a little bit more about Parker, because she seemed like a really kind of a sassy, witty person in her day.
Yeah, and it's in a way, Dorothy Parker's reputation doesn't give you the full picture, because she's known as being this super strong, sassy, I don't care what people think, I'm really witty and funny, and like you couldn't get through that armor of humor. And if you'll notice, the poems that I picked kind of peel away that strength and are a little bit more direct in terms of like the emotion that she was expressing or experiencing. So there's a lot of, experiencing loss or breaking someone's heart, or, having the kind of being tortured by complicated love and that sort of thing. And I wanted the music to reflect both the strength of that, but also the vulnerability. And the band that I used for this project were people that could be and play in a very vulnerable way and be open to not just like plowing through and playing crazy chord changes and being like super strong all of the time, but allowing there to be space and like and risk in the amount of space that they're leaving, or the amount of vulnerability. I even had the band sing on the last song. And that is probably the most vulnerable someone will ever be, is to be singing on a recording as not a vocalist. But that's kind of the play in this Little Words project is kind of between the strength of being vulnerable and also the vulnerability of having to be strong. So that's kind of one of the themes throughout the project.
And speaking of that personnel, you share those players with your trio, Twin Talk.
Yes.
And you recently came out with an album eponymously titled.
Yes. There's going along with the Chicago community thing. There's something very special about finding musicians that you trust, and so it made sense to me to ask my brothers to be a part of this project that was going to be very vulnerable. So the band Twin Talk is represented in my own personal project. But Twin Talk itself is a 3-person collective band. Yeah. There's no leader. We are all involved in it equally. And that band is not so much project-based, but we've kind of committed to a long-term exploration of how to communicate with each other musically. And so there's a lot of freedom and interplay and like intricate detail in that band that has been a really fulfilling exploration. And this second album, it's called Twin Talk, and the band is called Twin Talk. So the idea of twins sharing this really personal communication. I have younger sisters that are twins, and so I've seen them communicate with each other just with looks or like partial words. And the idea of having that kind of being on the same page in that transcendence sort of way is what we try to do as a band. So that's where Twin Talk comes from.
So we've covered vocalist, bassist, just being a gigging musician here in Chicago. Now comes the educator hat. You teach at multiple places, including private lessons and at Birch Creek, but I would venture to guess that the Wheaton Conservatory is probably one of your more traditional school.
Sure, yeah. I'm the jazz ensemble director at Wheaton College, and that was a role that I in no way imagined I would have being in my late 20s and being a, like creative improvising musician. Like the idea of like being a professor or, a director of an ensemble seems like something for older people.
For gray-haired,
and I'm very grateful to Wheaton for taking kind of this bizarre risk in allowing a younger artist to take the reins of a great program. And so I've been learning a lot as the students are hopefully learning from me. But we've been digging into some classic jazz repertoire, and we also did a concert in the spring with John Wojciechowski, who's one of Chicago's great. Yeah, you were there.
You had Artie Black too in the band.
Right. Yeah.
Which took me by surprise. Whoa.
Again, the Chicago community is tight knit. But so kind of doing both the traditional repertoire and also exposing students to what's going on in their community and in the current moment. And so it's been a great kind of exchange between the students and myself in that way. Mm-hmm.
So then, how would you say that your approach is to jazz education, either one-on-one or in the classroom, as opposed to, if there is anything opposed to other programs?
Well, let's see. So I feel very much like I'm a product of being mentored by older musicians or professors or teachers, or even peers or people that are just slightly older than me. And that is a pretty strong and consistent tradition in jazz evolution itself, right? So there wasn't always jazz school, but there was always this sense of you'd learn from the older, more experienced musicians.
Like an apprenticeship.
And they would take you under their wing and they would show you what to do or what not to do. And there's this kind of beautiful cycle that I am still being mentored by the people that are older than me and more experienced and wiser. But I have something to offer the people that are coming up next. And through that exchange, there's this really healthy exchange of knowledge and innovation and kind of, having one arm in the future and one arm in the past kind of thing. And knowing that you don't have to be a certain age or a certain experience level to reach someone that's coming up next, or to, you're never too old to be mentored by someone that is, has more experience than you. And so kind of taking that teacher is student is teacher model, it makes sense, especially in this genre that has a huge tradition of that.
I think no matter where you stray, that I shall go with you away. Though you may wander sweeter lands, you will not soon forget my hand.
So as someone who wants to promote jazz to another generation of artists and educated listeners, if you could debunk any big myth of this music, what would it be?
Oh man, debunking myths.
Either one or multiple.
Yeah, I think I'll do all of them.
There you go. We'll be here well.
Yeah. Well, I guess one of the classic myths is that jazz is dead, and
I think you've just debunked that right now.
And it's not, because I'm still here. Or that jazz is one type of music. I think that for the casual listener of jazz music or someone that's unfamiliar with this music, I would encourage or, like invite people to explore what is going on in their community, because there's a lot of different things happening.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's a scene in Naperville, albeit small maybe, but it's there. I used to play at Heaven on 7.
Yeah.
Like
Eric Scoe still plays there.
Yeah. It's like there's live music happening in in your community, and you can find it and see if you like it. And if you find something that you don't like, don't worry, because there's 18,000 other things that don't sound anything like it that are still jazz. So kind of be curious and be hungry, and don't write off a genre just because you think it sounds like elevator music, because I guarantee that Xavier Breaker doesn't sound like elevator music.
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all.
I mean, I think that I can't really think of any good myths right now. But there's a lot of exciting things happening, and I think that's kind of the theme that's in my head right now. But that as people in the Chicagoland area, we can take pride in this really exciting time for music in Chicago.
Cool. And, just going off the topic of expectations, I have here in the studio with us jazz studies vocal major Grace Blackford, and she'd like to talk to you about, well, I think I'll have her explain her thesis here.
Let's bring her out. Okay.
I brought her in, one, because she's smart, but also because I don't feel as comfortable talking about this topic as she does, having, you explain.
Welcome.
Hello. Okay, so I've been getting very interested in kind of the idea of jazz being a man's world, and just kind of how that can be detrimental to the art form.
Sure.
And certainly the women who are trying to go out there and do it. And I think it's probably evolved in a lot of ways. I'm sure that it used to be more difficult to be a female instrumentalist or a vocalist.
Yeah.
But now I definitely see changes being made, but I still sense that vibe, just kind of being a woman who is like interested at all. There's still this kind of underlying vibe of,
being the outlier.
Exactly. So I just kind of wanted to talk to you about your experiences, if you have anything to offer, in that regard.
Yeah, it's funny. I've been a lot more conscious or aware of kind of what it means to be a woman and a musician in the jazz world. I think when I was in college and when I was coming up, I did what probably a lot of young women do, and that's they say, oh, it has nothing to do with me being a woman, or it doesn't matter. If anything, it's great because, people want to have a girl in the band, or, so the weird stuff that was, super sexist back in the day, I don't experience that now because the things that I've experienced have been positive, right?
Yeah,
So it's kind of like denial of any sense of sexism that's happening.
Yeah.
And as I've gotten old, I think I'm becoming more aware of how it's not gone, and it's not I'm not unaffected by my gender in this jazz world, and that a lot of it is a lot more subtle, or it makes me think harder about what I'm doing and the reasons for why I do the things that I do. Right. So more specifically, let's see. I generally surround myself with people that I feel comfortable with and safe with in terms of how I make music. And I say it's still just generally in the woman's world, like if I get a call from someone that I don't know to come and play a session, as women, we have to be a little bit more cautious about accepting that invitation to go to some random address. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's something that my male counterparts would generally not have any sort of thought with.
Think twice.
Just the kind of the usual, woman security thing is, it's like I'm out late and I'm by myself and I have all of this gear, right. I have to find an apartment that I feel like I can come home late and still feel safe with, that kind of thing. So those are kind of like the general being a woman and having this particular profession, and kind of the issues of feeling safe and secure, but also making all those important musical connections with people. then as a performer, you get a lot more, I think generally people feel a lot more comfortable talking about how women's appearance affects them as opposed to a male's appearance. Jazz music is an art form where the musicians are improvising and making really heartfelt, in the moment musical decisions, and the point is to be very uninhibited, right? But if you're worried about how your face looks all the time, if you're worried about making it look like I'm, smiling for the whole performance so that people will feel good about it, that's going to take away from my art and my music making. And so I've, as a musician, had to make a call and decide that, I'm either going to worry about my presentation as a musician, or I'm going to not worry about it and accept the fact that some of my photographs from live shows are going to be a little bit weird.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I could talk probably forever about any particular avenue of this. So if we want to get more specific about a certain area, we totally can.
I think just maybe talking about jam sessions, or maybe feeling like you have to prove yourself in a certain way, either as a vocalist or a bass player. What are some of those experiences maybe?
Yeah. Well, I'll go backwards. So the proving of oneself. Generally, there are fewer women in the jazz community. So the odds of there, A, being a woman, and B, there being a woman that is highly proficient is much less common in the general jazz musician's experience. So when you come in to a jam session and say, hi, I'm a musician and I would like to play a song, the expectation, just based on statistics, right? The expectation is that you're going to be at this lower level, if at any level. So then when you go and you sit in and you prove that you are competent, or good, then their expectation level, just is totally blown out of the water, right? And so you can get kind of an inflated sense of self sometimes, because it's like, whoa, you're so good because you can do the average amount of, you know what I mean? And so as women, we have to be aware of just because people didn't expect for us to be at a competent level doesn't mean that we're amazing necessarily, but just that we've exceeded people's expectations. So you have to be very honest with yourself about what level you're playing at, or was that really a great rendition of that song, or did I just prove that I can sing, So it's you don't want to be too reliant on other people's wild feedback, because people get very I don't know, they get freaked out by the fact that a girl can do something, but let's see, what else? The environment of a jam session is kind of it's like a dude's hang, right? And one of my current roommates is a jazz saxophonist, and she and I have had conversations about how we don't really love going to jam sessions all the time, because it is a very specific environment, and there are generally not that many female musicians that are there. And we were talking about how cool it would be to get a bunch of the women musicians in Chicago, which there are a lot of, and we should just all come together and pick a jam session to just go hang out at, and just kind of and not in an aggressive here we are kind of way, but just kind of to change the balance of gender at a jam session, because everyone can still do the activities of playing at a jam session, but just how cool or different, or maybe it wouldn't be different at all, but just the idea of having a more balanced equation would just be super cool. So maybe we'll have to do that kind of
be amazing.
But yeah, there's definitely a sisterhood of Chicago musicians, and I think generally just of women in the communities throughout the United States, where it's important to support each other and be bonded in our shared experience, and not get super vibey about well, I'm I'm a singer too, so here we go.
Exactly.
But yeah, no, I'd say it's not so much that you're not gonna get work because you're a girl. They're not gonna be you can't play in my club because you're a girl. It's more of you are. I think we're all kind of responsible for like redefining how people should think about us. You know, like
Yeah.
it's our job in a way to like show people how we want to be treated, and to demonstrate like what is cool and what is not cool.
Which is almost scary. Like there's a lot of pressure involved too, because like you were saying, there's an expectation that, you know, a woman isn't going to be very good or very well versed in jazz maybe. And I think that's a lot of pressure. Well, what if I do mess up? And, you know, to them, that's just proving sort of like the typical thing. You know what I mean? And that's something that always kind of scares me, like being a really young singer, is like, well, what if I go up there and I do flub? And then, oh, well, I just made it even worse for all the girls out there.
We've just been set back for years now.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that like that can be a great motivator to be you know, as serious and committed as possible in order to, you know, do justice to your gender.
Right.
But I think there's also a certain level of like, if you go to a session as a singer and you come up and you sing a song and you're like, I did okay, like something was weird, but it was fine. The important thing is that you come back to that jam session.
Right.
And you don't just come once and be like, oh no, like it wasn't good, and then you're gone, right? Like insisting that you are a part of this community, and you show up every week, and people get to know you for who you are, right? And they see that you're progressing and like you're learning and getting better. Like that is the best thing. Like that's the best advertisement for female musicians, is to be committed to being a part of the community, and then you can help to morph that community, and you know, like you being there might make people think twice about the like offhanded girl comments that they usually throw out, you know. Or you know, like maybe people don't have a relationship with a female jazz musician, and you know, like you could be that person.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I think, and I think I could do a better job too, but like, you know, me saying, I don't like to go to sessions as much because that community doesn't fit me. It's like, but if I'm not there, how would it ever change? You know,
that's the hard part. Is breaking the mold. Yeah.
And so I think the more that we can be proactive in being a part of the community and kind of saying, we fit in here, and this is how it works, then it'll become less bizarre and more normal.
Yeah.
So
for sure. And then I guess the last thing that I'm kind of interested in, because something that I want to kind of get further into is sort of like the instrumentalist vocalist dichotomy that kind of exists. And since you do both, I thought maybe you'd have a good perspective on it. I know sometimes, you know, I feel like maybe it's more accepted to be a singer as a female in a lot of ways. But then at the same time, it's like being a female and a vocalist, that's like a double whammy of kind of being looked down upon in some ways. So I don't know, just like anything you have to say about that would be awesome.
Well, I guess generally that the vocalist role has been like the way in, you know, like, so that's if you're a girl and you say that you're in the band, they're gonna say either you're the singer generally, you know, like, because that's the familiar format.
Yes.
And so in a way that carries with it the baggage of familiarity, you know, and because there are fewer female instrumentalists in like our general consciousness, then there's less baggage tied to me because people have never seen a girl bass player before, so they don't know what to think of me, so they don't have any prejudgments, you know. And so I think that's a lot of where that stems from, is just that it's a typical role versus something that's totally unfamiliar. But yeah, I think that, what do I think? I think that I don't know, do you want to talk about the like instrumentalist versus vocalist relationship, or more of just kind of how their different people are perceived?
I was kind of focusing more on the perceptions.
Yeah, great. Yeah. And I think it just is like the historical role is like they probably know a female vocalist more than they know like a female, I don't know, bass player, although I'm one, so you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, great chat.
Yeah, really great show. Important to talk about.
And I just want to thank Katie Ernst for being here, and it's certainly been a heck of a day. We're in a different studio this week. I've been moving around in 3 different studios, so yeah, just the fact that you came over, followed through, and this has been definitely one of my best interviews we've ever had in the show. So of the 3 that we've had, but we're working on it.
It's in the top 3.
Hey,
Yeah.
it's gonna be hard to talk.
Well, thanks so much for having me, guys. This was great.
Heart will awaken. Whose will be the broken heart when dawn comes by? Whose will be the broken heart when dawn comes